Welcome to part 4 of the Age of Jackson. Now we're going to talk about the quest for the White House. In 1824, James Monroe had served 2 terms and was retiring. The formerly Jeffersonian Republicans, now calling themselves the Democratic Republicans, was the only political party in town, right? Now, Andrew Jackson, by this time, has raised to enough fame that he's decided that he is going to run for the presidency. So Andrew Jackson is going to run for president as a Democratic Republican. However, James Monroe has already picked the guy he says should replace him as the president, his trusted and very talented Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. So he runs as a Democratic Republican. But we're not done yet. At this time, you still had congressional caucuses to try and decide who should be the next president, King Caucus, and Congress had said that it should be the Secretary of the Treasury, William Crawford. So he's going to run as a Democratic Republican. Still not done. Henry Clay takes a look at the situation and says there's nobody that's really representing the West. Andrew Jackson's from Tennessee, you're from Kentucky, but oh well. So he announces that he's going to run for the president as, you guessed it, a Democratic Republican. Got one left. John C. Calhoun from South Carolina says nobody here represents the South. Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, okay. So he announced that he is going to run for the president as well, and he, of course, is going to run as a Democratic Republican. So we have 5 candidates for president in the 1824 election. Now it's going to quickly drop to 4. John C. Calhoun, who was actually the first to officially announce, is going to look at the political landscape and realize he can't win. And so what he's going to do is he's going to drop out of the presidency and he is going to focus on a vice presidential run, specifically tying himself to both Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams' ticket, right? He's playing both sides of the fence here, right? When the election comes, Andrew Jackson is going to get 151% of the popular vote to John Quincy Adams' 113,000, but he's only going to get 41% of the Electoral College. What does this mean? It means that the election goes into the House of Representatives. Now, third place finisher was William Crawford, which is kind of astounding because the dude had had a stroke a few weeks before the election. Right? And then finally, our fourth place finisher, I feel bad for this guy, Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to run for president 3 times, lose 3 times, but this one had to sting a little. He finished behind a guy that had a stroke. Okay. When this goes in the House of Representatives, it's pretty much down to 2 individuals, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams. Now, William Crawford's supporters pretty much split pretty evenly amongst the 2, right? So Henry Clay, though finishing 4th and finishing behind the guy with the stroke, is technically become a kingmaker. He is going to decide who wins this election, right? Andrew Jackson or John Quincy Adams. Now, he is going to have a private dinner with John Quincy Adams. What was exactly said is not actually recorded, but in the end, he is going to endorse and ask his people to support John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, therefore, is going to win in the House of Representatives. He's going to win the presidency, and he's also going to immediately appoint Henry Clay as his Secretary of State, right, as president-elect. Right. So right away, Jackson supporters see this as underhanded dealing, a stolen election, a corrupt bargain. They're so incensed, in fact, that the Democratic Party now splits, and you have Jackson Democrats. This is the origin of the actual Democrat Party that you know today. And they are going to, in 1824, nominate Andrew Jackson for the 1828 presidential election. The next 4 years is going to see a John Quincy Adams presidency that was constantly embattled with pro-Jackson supporters, right? And Jackson himself is going to be made out as the new symbol of the democratic spirit that was growing in America at the time. He's a common man. He's the symbol of the common man. He's from the West. He's from meager, humble beginnings. Of course, we know this isn't true, right? I mean, he was born on the East, in the Carolinas. He apparently had enough means that after he was orphaned at 14 still to become a lawyer and a horse breeder. There's nothing common about this guy, right? He got himself elected the head of a militia during the War of 1812, but remember, perception always beats reality, right? The perception is that he represents the common man. He's not an East Coast elite, right? So from this, we foster in what we call the age of Jackson, right? As these men began building up to the 1828 presidential election. And when 1828 rolled around, boy, what an election they had. This is often seen as one of the, if not the dirtiest campaigns in presidential history. These ones that we see nowadays don't hold a candle to this one. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Shots being fired, if you will, from both sides, sometimes literally. Henry Clay will actually get in a disagreement with a Jackson supporter and end up fighting him in a duel, right? Rachel's divorce comes up, right? Of course, we mentioned before that was going to be political fodder for later. The fact that she was divorced, the fact that she had committed bigamy is going to come up as part of the political campaigns, the smearing campaigns on Andrew Jackson. And it's going to go both ways. Jackson supporters are going to claim that when John Quincy Adams was the envoy to Russia, that he was arranging for American prostitutes to visit the Russian czar. So these two candidates in the 1828 elections are throwing accusations at each other. Hell, Jackson's people just said that John Quincy Adams was a pimp, right? Now, despite all this mudslinging that went on, Jackson is going to win this election pretty easily. He's going to get 178 of the electoral votes. John Quincy Adams is only going to get 83, right? But there are going to be some unintended consequences. The stress of this election was tremendous, especially on Rachel. Rachel didn't like the fact that her past was being thrown out for all the public to see. And just a few days after the successful election of Andrew Jackson to the presidency, Rachel Jackson is going to have a heart attack and die. And Andrew Jackson is going to enter the White House as a widower. But the people were jubilant about the election of the common man, Andrew Jackson. Matter of fact, when every election, there had been inaugural balls that would be held there in the White House to celebrate the election of the president. This one, a lot of the common gentry said, hey, he's the president of the common man. We are clearly invited to this party. And so they are going to show up to Jackson's inauguration in the thousands. Over 20,000 people will show up at the White House in order to celebrate at the inaugural ball, right? They're going to flood the White House with muddy shoes and breaking furniture, and they almost killed Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was almost crushed. He had to escape through a back way to get away from the people. Matter of fact, the scene is best described by one of the social writers of that day. Margaret Bayard Smith was a Washington socialite here in these early days, right? And she actually wrote a book on the first 40 years of Washington society, and she witnessed this inauguration. She had been to previous ones, but she never saw something like this. This is how she described it. She goes, "What a scene we did witness. The majesty of the people disappeared, and a rabble, a mob was scrambling, fighting, romping. Cut glass and china to the amount of several $1,000s was broken in the struggle to get to the punch. Ladies fainted. Men were to be seen with bloody noses. And such a scene of confusion took place as is impossible to describe. Those who got in could not get out but by the door again, but had to scramble out of windows. The president, after nearly being pressed to death and almost suffocated by the people, in their eagerness to shake hands with Old Hickory, had to retreat through a back way. Ladies and gentlemen only had been expected, not the people en masse, but it was the people's day and the people's president, and the people would rule." So, what was the people's presidency like?